the enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy. And I think I've
Oh,
talked about
yeah.
this concept
Yep.
in
John 10:10.
yeah, in a previous episode too. I think it's in the Psalms. I can't remember exactly where it's at, but it says if basically the sentiment is if the foundations are destroyed, what can the righteous do? Well, the
Mhm.
foundations of society is the nuclear family, is the man.
Yeah.
You know, and then we've seen that destruction, and we see how fast the destruction of the nuclear family has led to degeneracy and the rapid progression of it. Where there's groups now. I know it's less obscure, but now that I've seen the slippery slope, it's not outside the realms of possibility that this starts being pushed as trying to be normal as pedophilia.
Hey, my name is Steve Hinton, and I serve as a pastor and author.
And I'm your co-host Matthias. I serve as a personal trainer and a volunteer at my local church. Join us now for another episode of The Man Identity. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of The Man Identity. We are here with
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
magical, amazing Steve Hinton and myself. And we are here today to talk about something pretty serious, pretty heavy that's been on our hearts. And I know it's on a lot of men's hearts and a lot of just Christians' hearts in general, is Pride Month. And we actually want to come in and celebrate traditional biblical marriage sex month. And so
Yeah.
that's what we are here
Yeah.
to do. We're going to talk about kind of the history of LGBTQ, where all the Pride Month stuff came from. Steve over here he has an amazing blog called Kingdomology. We'll have the link in the description. He wrote an amazing blog post on this topic itself, kind of talking about briefly about the history of it. And
Came out
just,
last Monday.
yeah, it came out last Monday. So we're going to kind of break down, kind of derive some of our information from there, talk about that. And if you'd like, really check that out. It's a really edifying, uplifting blog post. He does an amazing job and puts a lot of effort into it. So go check that out. So, Steve, we're here today to talk about pride, here to talk about traditional biblical marriage and sex
Mhm.
and why it should be
Mhm.
celebrated and why June should be celebrated as that instead.
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
so I know in the blog post, you kind of talk about the history
Mhm.
of this. And so and I know this it's one thing to read about the history of something, but it's something else to really live through it. You feel the tension,
Yeah.
you feel the cultural like shifts. I don't know how else to describe it, but it's like, if my kids, live in a different world than I do, and I grew up seeing the change from the slippery slope of LGBT stuff, they're not gonna
Mhm. Mhm.
understand the cultural tensions that were felt and what you lived and how you
Yeah.
had to
Yeah.
walk on eggshells, or they're not gonna understand these things. So can I don't know if this is where you want to start, but can you like maybe tell us a little bit about the history of the sexual revolution, kind of where this
Yeah.
all kind of came from, the feminism, whatever it is, like how did that feel? Like what did that look like? What was that
Yeah.
like?
Yeah. Well, I do. I think that's important. I remember having a discussion with a guy back in 11, maybe 10, and he said, "Steve, there is no slippery slope." And I just wish that guy could get back in his time capsule and go back and say, well, I guess there really is, because there is, just to see how things have progressed in that time. What I wanted to do to really kick it off, Matthias, is, and you touched on it, that we want to celebrate something. When I posted this on Monday, and I posted on my personal Facebook page, and one woman responded to it, and she said, "Okay, tell me how gay marriage has harmed traditional marriage." And I thought, I didn't respond to her, but I thought, well, you've missed the point. It's not so much that we're saying, hey, you have harmed traditional marriage. It's traditional marriage has been overlooked, it's been pushed down, and traditional biblical marriage is actually something that's very, very good.
Yeah.
And the harm in society is not on God's design, it's on society itself. That you look at what we're dealing with today. Matthias, we're looking at universities, we're looking at public restrooms, we're looking at bathrooms, we're looking at schools where women have to worry, okay, is this guy going to come in? And then you have college female athletes and high school female athletes who are getting beat out by guys who are wrestling with their own gender dysphoria and their own emotions, who think they're a girl, and well, they're not, but they beat them out. You look at the progression in 1996. President Clinton He was part of what was called at the time DOMA, Defense of Marriage Act. And part of the reason they were doing that is because they wanted to give rights to gays and lesbians. Those were the only two terms at the time. Uh, but when Obama came in, he issued something, not just gay and lesbian, but LGBT. Well, when President Biden got in, he extended that to LGBT
DQ plus
TQ plus.
IA something. Yeah.
You're right, right, and it really is this progression, and it's damaging.
Yeah.
Anywhere you move away from, anytime you move away from God's design, there's always going to be repercussions, and it really goes back further than pride. But here's the point. What I want to do today, and I know your heart as well, you want good. It's not for us to sit around and throw rocks at these people. I want us to understand that we've all sinned. It's interesting. Paul is very clear in Romans 1, Matthias, talking about this downward spiral. And it's very, very clear that God's design is not homosexual relationships and lesbian relationships, and it's a downward spiral. And he talks about that in Romans 1. But in Romans chapter 2, he right off the bat, he says, and you who condemn these people, you condemn yourself because you're doing the same thing. Well, you're not doing the same thing, but you're doing the same thing. Here's what I mean: any sexual deviant, any sexual sin, anything that is outside of God's design is sexual sin. So you have a guy, you have a young man who really believes in marriage between a man and a woman. He really has energy against what the Pride Month is doing, but yet he's addicted to pornography. Okay, that's a problem right there.
Yeah.
That affects him, and it affects his future bride until it's dealt with. There's a whole industry that devalues women, and thinking about women, Matthias, in this downward spiral. Um, I don't remember if the lady made it, but there was a Biden appointee for the Supreme Court, and one of the senators asked her to give a definition of a woman, and she said, "Well, I'm not a scientist. I can't do that." And I thought, my goodness, this is so simple. How do we get to a place where we have to debate what a definition of a woman is?
Yeah.
So going down this path, it brings destruction
Mhm.
really on women. That women are the ones who are losing their rights to have their own sport, their own restroom, things of that nature. But talking about where it came from, and you mentioned earlier, Matthias, the sexual revolution.
Mhm.
That is a term that was applied to the early '60s, late '50s, early '60s, and it was this idea that I'm just going to do whatever I want sexually, and the motive was, or the underpinning was, if it feels good, do it.
Yeah.
Free love. We are breaking away from our parents' traditions. We are breaking away. It was called a revolution. It's a revolt, a revolt against authority. And this was a revolt ultimately from God's design. And God's design is so beautiful. And I don't think people realize that in the world today, because Hollywood has said that sex is, it's all about the feelings. Go out and do it. And when you do it according to a traditional biblical marriage way, that's where it goes to die and to get born. But we don't see that. But the sexual revolution just launched that free love, free sex, whatever feels good, and then homosexuality is just the next step
Yeah.
from that.
So what you're saying here is that you're just for the viewer's sake is that this is I don't know if we made this clear. We're saying this, we kind of talking about what you said to that guy or that guy said to you earlier about the slippery slope is not real. Well, we're saying
Right.
if only you
It
could go
is
back,
real.
yeah, if only you could go back and see the slippery slope didn't start here in the 2000s. This started way back here,
Yeah.
and we're just seeing way the down like the cascade of this. So we're saying all this kind of goes back to the sexual revolution, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
It all goes back to, Matthias, the idea of I'm going to do it my way. And this is nothing new in the history of humanity. What was kind of interesting when I was researching Pride Month earlier and the origins of this, and really it kicked off in 1969. But in that, I didn't never I never knew this, but in 1924, the first homosexual group formed, which reminded me. Not a lot of people know this, but the 1920s were referred to as the Roaring Twenties.
Mhm.
You know, it was a time after World War One. Um, People had money. The stock market was doing well. It was before the crash, and it was kind of a sexual revolution at that time as well. The whole point being, any time in culture where you get to a place where it's, usually you have plenty of money, plenty of wealth, plenty of stuff, and you're only thinking about you and what feels good, and you're not thinking about God's design. It just gets worse and worse and worse
Yeah.
because you have become the arbitrator of your own truth. Now, so let's talk about the Pride Month, and how this progressed. Again, it really began in the 1960s, the sexual revolution. In 1969, and this was the epicenter that really kind of kicked it off. There was a gay nightclub in New York, of Greenwich Village, I believe, and the owner and the staff, they were selling alcohol without a liquor license, so they were breaking the law. And the police came and they raided the place, and the testimony said that they were rough on the people. And were they overly rough? Okay, maybe. And I think we ought to concede that there have been times where guys have just been idiots and jerks, and they have they beat up gay people. I think we ought to own that. Guys have been jerks. But at the same time, why did the police show up at this place uh, initially? Because they were breaking the law. So they stormed the place. They were arresting people, and the crowd came out, and the police actually had to go back into the restaurant, barricade themselves until uh, help came, and they got them out. But that produced something called the Stonewall riots that lasted into July. In 1970, in New York and maybe Chicago, half a dozen places, San Francisco, I'm sure, that 1970 in June 28th, they had the very first uh, gay pride march. And one of the slogans was, I can't remember exactly what it was. I'm pretty sure I've got it in the blog post here. So you go back to that first march in 1970, and the slogan that was going through the streets was "Say it clear, say it loud, gay is good, gay is proud." And that's where it began, and it was a year. It became a yearly parade, but it was on one day. And the progression was this: the first idea was, hey, well, the first problem was identifying. In other words, taking the feel, the propensity, and saying this is who I am,
Yeah.
instead of this is who I am, who feels these emotions. But the progression was first, hey, we want you to leave us alone. Then it became, hey, we want you to accept us, not just leave us alone, but to accept us. And then it became, hey, we want to have rights. We want to have civil rights. And then it became, hey, we want to be married just like you're married. And then it became, okay, we demand that you respect our marriage.
Mhm.
And and then it became just kind of a militant thing. And
Yeah.
and why were there so many organizations that folded? And, there's a connection to the Boy Scouts of America. The Boy Scouts of America folded to this
Mhm.
because there was a pressure. So it started out, hey, we just want to be left alone, and it grew to this pressure of, you must accept us,
Yeah.
and if you do not accept us, you are hateful. And this reminds me the episode that we had several months ago, the gravitas. A lot of times people felt like, well, I don't want somebody to think I'm hateful, so I'm just going to give in and I'm going to support you.
Yeah. And it's
Well,
like, sorry, I don't mean
go
to
ahead,
interrupt
go
you.
ahead.
But yeah, what you're talking about is everything that I've lived through. Because you talked about the sexual revolution. You kind of grew up in those times. Everything you just described of, well, we want to be left alone. well, we want to have marriage rights. We want to, and, so on, so on, so on, so on. Now it's in your face. If you don't accept it, you're the outcast. You're the bigot.
Well,
Is
what you said there, Matthias, about in your face. I was talking to Debbie the other day about this subject, and we were talking about, a woman who's a prostitute. And the reality is that that's out of God's design, and that's just as much a sin as gay marriage or lesbian marriage. And I said, well, here's the difference: the prostitutes are not throwing their belief, their lifestyle, their agenda. They're not throwing it in my face.
mhm.
They're not expecting me to bow to it. You were asking about my story, Matthias. One of the memories that I have is watching a show called MASH,
Yeah,
Mobile Army Surgical Hospital. Alan
yeah,
Alden was the main character, and this had to be in the 70s. And on this particular episode, there was a soldier who was gay. Said he was gay. Nobody had a problem with him being gay except for Frank Burns. Well, who was Frank Burns? Well, he was the idiot major. Everybody knows Frank's the idiot. And so Hollywood crafted it like all the smart people like Hawkeye and Trapper, the real intelligent characters, they thought he was okay, just leave him alone.
yeah.
The only guy who had a problem was Frank Burns, who wanted to have him arrested because he was, you know, identifying as a gay man.
Right. So they overly caricaturized, the idiot to be the only one who's against it.
Right,
Yeah.
right,
So
right. And then the next memory was a woman called Ellen DeGeneres
yeah,
who came out as a lesbian, and then what do we have today? It's almost impossible to watch something on TV that does not have a main character who's either a gay or a lesbian. So Hollywood has permeated the culture with this. And again, my desire for all this, Matthias, is not so much, hey, we want to say you guys are wrong, although we want to say, hey, there's a problem with this, that
yeah,
there really are problems with this, but ultimately to say, hey, we need to come back to the divine design that God's got
yeah.
something
We want to give the
so
prescription.
yeah, beautiful and good. But there is this ripple effect, and it really does affect women, as we've already said.
Yeah. Er,
But it is this progression. The connection with June. Why is it that it's the entire month of June? And I think about that. Christmas isn't the entire month of June. St. Patrick's Day, which is my birthday, that ought to be the whole month of
the whole
March, but
month.
the whole month, but it's not. Okay, so what is it with June? Well, and I talk about this. This is the first point that I talk about in the blog post, Matthias. That June, as far back as memory goes, has been the marriage month. It's been the wedding month. You go back to Roman culture, you go back to Greek culture, you go back to European culture. A lot of theories as to why that is. Um, More flowers are available. It's a good time of the year. One
And
European idea was, well, the young bride and groom, if they get married and if they have a child right off the bat, well, there's enough time for the wife to have the first child and and heal and get strong again to do the
for the next
harvest for the
harvest,
next
yeah,
year.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. For Debbie and me, it's like, okay, we just finished a year of college. We've got 2 more years of college, and we did. We got married young. Uh, June is like, we've only been out of college a couple of weeks. Let's get the show on the road. And we've been married 35 years. But June has always been the marriage month. So for June Pride, it's this idea that deep inside, we're all convicted until we totally sear our hearts.
Mhm.
The Holy Spirit convicts us. When we're convicted by the Holy Spirit, we have two options. We can bow under the conviction, soften our hearts, and repent and allow God to redeem us. And there's a beautiful story of a woman named Dr. Rosario Butterfield that maybe we can get to in a bit, who was a lesbian and she came to know Christ. The other option is we can fight it, and that's what we're having. That's why there's this mandate. You must accept us,
Yeah.
because I want to silence the conviction in my heart. So if I can convince the world that what I'm doing is good, maybe I can convince myself too that this is good. then I'll feel good.
Yeah. I
Well,
th
what do we know in the statistics? I mean, the suicide rates in gay men is higher than men who aren't gay, and especially when you get into the trans and all of that.
yeah.
But to push against June Pride Month is to say, um, it's no longer about June being the month for, I like what you said earlier, trad weddings or
Yeah,
trad
trad
marriage,
biblical
or
marriage
yeah,
sex month.
yeah. It's no longer about that because we want to push that down because if it's about that, it's not about me,
Yeah,
and I've got to deal with my own brokenness. But if I can push that and make it about accepting me, then I'm going to feel better about myself.
yeah. And, I wanna address something real quick. You talked about it's the progression of it, and my generation has seen that progression where we went, "Oh, well, we don't wanna be" like you said, in the army show, we don't wanna be, the weird guy, the obviously idiot
Yeah,
guy who's not cool with it, and, that was my thoughts, and I remember when I was trying to first form my thoughts about all this in, like, high school. Like, I'm like, "Okay, well, I know this is wrong. How should I think about this?" And I would think, like, "Okay, like, I'll just adopt the view of, you can live that life, that's fine, as long as you're not pushing it on me." Well,
yeah.
then like you said, that slippery slope happened so quickly to where it became you're walking on eggshells, and, that was the mindset of, like, 2011, 2012, and then, they're legally allowed to get married, and then it's like then all of a sudden now, like, I was in college or, now I'm outside of college, and I see these, trans people reading story time to children and,
Yeah, yeah,
like,
and that's
companies.
dangerous. Kids need to learn
Yeah.
reading, writing,
They
and
don't need to know
arithmetic.
what
Yeah,
sexuality is at all. They just need
right.
to know that there's boys and girls. Well, why? Well, you'll find out later,
Yeah,
or they
yeah.
or like, and that's all they need to know. And it is dangerous that it's been coming after our children. You see that, like you said, in Hollywood. I think it started with a slippery slope. It started with adults putting it into things like that. But then now it's in I have to Google a Christian reviews, like, is there any LGBT stuff in this child's, cartoon movie? And they're like, it'll be like, yes. And I'm like, sorry, baby, you
Mhm,
can't watch it. Like,
mhm.
and it's ridiculous to me, and it's trying to find the balance of loving my neighbor and loving God and loving my neighbor, and also standing for what's true and what's right. And
Mhm,
it's
mhm.
trying not to be sinful in my anger in where I've seen this go,
Yeah,
and resentment towards myself, my generation, the generation before me, for allowing it to get this far. Thinking that, oh, if I just thought the thinking process of, oh, you live your life, don't push it on anybody else, and we'll be all right. Thinking that that would just stay there and being okay with that.
yeah, yeah.
So as a Christian man trying to walk the line of, I know, God's kindness leads us to repentance. That's how we will lead others to repentance is show show Christ's love. But also I'm angry. I'm angry that I let
Yeah.
this get this far. I played a part in this. I'm
Mhm,
angry that this is being forced on me, forced on my children. This is having detrimental effects on, children in society with like I talked about, the drag queen library reading time and all the trans stuff being pushed through companies like Bud Light, like with Dylan Mulvaney, the trans guy,
mhm.
and it's like
Yeah,
all these big
there
corporate.
was some big pushback on that
Yeah,
pretty fast.
yeah, there was. But it's like Hollywood, you got big companies and brands, and then you've got, "Oh, well, if you don't let us read to your children, you're a bigot." And
Mhm,
so it's like I said, it's just walking that fine line of how do I be Christ-like in this? How do I have this righteous anger and still love others,
mhm, mhm.
And so that's the fine line we're walking as Christians. But I wanted to make this one statement as well. It's the enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy. And I think I've
Oh,
talked about
yeah.
this concept
Yep.
in
John 10:10.
yeah, in a previous episode too, where I think it's in the Psalms. I can't remember exactly where it's at, but it says, if basically the sentiment is if the foundations are destroyed, what can the righteous do? Well, the
Mhm.
foundations of society is the nuclear family, is the man,
Yeah.
eh, you know, and then we've seen that destruction, and we see how fast the destruction of the nuclear family has led to degeneracy and the rapid progression of it. Where there's groups now. I know it's less obscure, but now that I've seen the slippery slope, it's not outside the realms of possibility that this starts being pushed as trying to be normal is pedophilia. We see
Mhm.
these
Yeah,
groups.
there are Matthias, there are actually politicians, not a lot, but there are politicians, a few people in California who are wanting to lower the age of consent,
Yeah,
from
exactly.
like, yeah, from like 18 to 16, and then like 16 to maybe 14 or
Yeah, and
12.
that's how it's
So
gonna
yeah,
start.
yeah,
That's how it's gonna
yeah,
start, and we know we've seen the slippery slope, we've seen the writings on the wall, so I think we gotta try to figure this out now. But that's why we're here. We want to bring this to the public sphere. We want to have open dialogue, have open conversations about why should we actually celebrate traditional biblical marriage sex,
yeah,
to married sex. And so we see the problem. What's the prescription for it? How should we look at these things? How should we fight back in a loving and kind way to
yeah,
stand for righteousness? And how should we see the world? How should we celebrate this month? And I
yeah.
think that's what we wanted to address here today.
It is, and that was the point of my blog post, that challenge. One thing that comes to my mind, Matthias, is something that Jordan Peterson said. I know we got a lot of guys who like Jordan Peterson. I've listened to some of his interviews. I don't know a whole lot, but he made something about a statement along the lines of, before you worry about cleaning the house, clean your room first.
Mm,
And I think that's true. Just looking at our own thoughts, our own minds, our own actions, um, and then going into the community, going into the world, having my stuff wiretap first, understanding grace. I'm saved by grace. I need grace. I want to speak truth and love. John chapter 1, verse 14 talks about the fact that Jesus came full of grace and truth. So we want to have both that.
yeah.
Um, there are some general observations, Matthias, just to everybody, that we are to hold to the truth. I believe we need to hold to the truth. That has always been the tension. You mentioned, the thief, Satan. That was the very first temptation in Genesis chapter 3, where Satan said to Eve, or questioned, did God really say? Questioning God's truth,
Mhm.
and then contradicting, well, God really didn't. And then characterizing God as evil. Well, the only reason God said that is because God's holding out on you. The whole point being, Eve, you could do better. Okay.
Yeah.
So we want to stick to God's truth, and maybe guys just understanding that this whole sex thing, it's a marriage thing. I mean, you look at Genesis 1 and 2, Adam and Eve were together, then they had sex, and Genesis chapter 2 concludes with, the man and the woman were both naked and they felt no shame. So there's an order to it, that there's the reality that we are male and female. And Renee Webb talked about that a few episodes ago. We are male and female. And I loved what she said. We're actually going to be male and female in heaven too. I'm
Yeah.
always male building. That was really interesting. We are sexual beings, but we're sexual beings toward the opposite sex. Now, I understand there are different feelings because of the brokenness, and so many times, you have somebody who's deep in this lifestyle, that there's an abuse
Yeah.
that happened. Now we do have different propensities. Um, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, if you had a guy who had no desire to be married, we would say he's a bachelor. You know,
Yeah.
he's a bachelor. Now it's like, if you have a guy who is not attracted to women, the culture says, "Oh, you must be gay." What? No, I'm just not attracted to women. Maybe
Yes.
God's called me to be a Catholic priest or something.
Yeah,
It doesn't.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah. But God created us for this, and when we do it God's way, it's beautiful. So I think the first thing in the big picture, before we do anything, we need to know it,
Yeah.
and we need to hear it.
I think with knowing it, and I'm talking to my young men here, because I've grown up, and you talk about this in your book. You might have talked about it in blog posts before. Is living in your own sexual deviancy, your own
Mhm.
rebellion towards God in that regard. And I did too in my college years. There was a time when I was addicted to pornography as well. And so I think, of course, men, if you're a Christian man, And I'm sure there's lots of Christian out there who do struggle with these things, who are struggling with these things, who have struggled with these things. I think first and foremost, before we can really say anything, um, I think it's that concept of you need to get the log out of your own eye before
Yeah,
pulling
Matthew chapter
the
7. Yeah.
speck out of your brother's.
Mhm.
We
Yeah.
need to how can we go in and change this and stand for what is right and true if you aren't living what is right and true? And I know it's hard, and I know it's difficult, especially with the pornography addiction. It's so readily accessible. It's right there on your screen. You just a few taps away, you can
Yeah. Yeah.
find whatever you want to find. And so I want to talk about for a second, but I know you were kind of getting on a roll there. But this kind of really
No, you
came to
go ahead. You
my
go
heart
ahead.
and my mind in this that I wanted to encourage men like we can't sit here and preach and rave about what's true and what's right in this regard, trying to push back on Pride Month. If we aren't right ourselves, we need to be,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
we need to allow Jesus to cleanse us of these things. And thank the Lord, he delivered me from that addiction when I first met my wife. And I just wanted to put this out there before we kind of move on in the conversation that this is vitally important.
Yeah.
I want you to stand up for what's true, stand against the oppressive nature of the people who are saying they're oppressed, who are pushing this on us. I want us to be able to stand for what's right and true on it, but we need to be right and true ourselves. So that was it. I just wanted to throw that in there. It came to my
Well,
mind with what you were
and I'm
saying there.
glad you did. I'm glad you did, Matthias. And one of the quick challenges, applications would be, guys, you got to dump the pornography. Our culture says it's fine, it's good. It's not.
Mhm.
It's not good for women. It's not good for guys. You talked earlier about all of these damaging ripple effects, and there even is something to pornography. I don't know what the latest data is, but when you go to Gen Z, when you go to young men and young women, not only is are the marriage numbers down, but the number of young men and women having sex, just period, is down. But my hypothesis is, and I'm just almost positive this is true, but I want to couch it that way because I don't have any data in front of me right now. Is that one of the reasons why guys are having less sex is because, hey, I don't need to. I've got my pornography, and even AI can help with this.
Yeah.
So
Which is
it go
sorry. I
ahead.
was gonna say I literally watched a video the other day. It was like a documentary. I don't know if you know what the term gooning is. This is a little side tangent. It's like masturbation, but times 10 degeneracy.
Okay.
But I saw this video. Sorry, I brought this to my attention, and this is going to add to what you were saying about. It was like a documentary this guy on YouTube does, and he goes to something called a gooner, which is a guy who that's his lifestyle
Okay.
is basically it doesn't talk to women really. Maybe he wants a
Okay.
relationship someday, but his goon cave is what it was called. Had like at least 12 different screens, and like as a station
Mm,
almost for just different pornography all over every screen. And I always thought gooner was like a funny just terminology, like just funny
right.
slang term, but this is a real thing. This Discord group that they talk about in that video has like 100,000 members in it.
Oh wow,
Yeah,
that's
so
sad.
yeah, and it's growing, and it's like I saw the guy in the documentary is very self-aware about the damages this is
Hmm.
causing,
Hmm.
uh, and so, it's watching it is funny, but the reality of it is not,
Yeah.
because, the interaction between the guy and they were, he was being very real, he's joking around and stuff, so it was but it's very serious, it's a very serious thing, and it all comes back to a heart issue, like,
Yeah.
for example, talking about, you talked about in your book, trying to find, and for me, myself too, is the same way, like, trying to find fulfillment, find that meaning in women, chasing women,
Hmm.
and, uh, you know, throughout my whole life, I felt this propensity to have a girlfriend, to chase
Hmm.
women, and I didn't know why until looking back as an adult. I was trying to fill this void of, well, if
Yeah.
I can get their approval, I will finally feel worthy. I'll finally
Yeah.
feel
Yeah.
lovable. And so I just want to address the men listening to this real quick. If you have this propensity, I mean, desiring a wife is a good thing, but if
Yeah.
you feel
Yeah.
this like,
That's the way we're wired up. Yeah.
yeah, but if you can't be single for long, there's probably a deeper heart thing going on there. At least there was for me. Like I needed that validation of I'm worthy. I can be, women approve of me. I'm lovable. So that was something I needed as a man that I ultimately can only find in God. And, after getting married, I learned that that's where I can't get that fulfillment from my spouse, from my
Yeah, yeah.
partner.
Well, that's my story, and I note this in the book, the Confessions book, and then the blog post that when Debbie and I got married, she was a virgin, I was not. Looking at my own story with the different dads that were coming in and out of my life, and I just was not given any affirmation on any realm, and there was a brokenness. And here's this beautiful woman who is wanting to get physical with me, and well, hey, that makes me feel good, and I went in that direction because I was hurting, I was aching. Now there's a place in marriage, in other words, biblical marriage sex actually gives even biological affirmation, the chemicals that are released in the brain and all of that. But yeah, to your point, that we got to look at our own lives before we look at the world. And so many times we've got a brokenness. We're going to, there was a book in the 60s called Iron John. It was one of the first, and the guy is not a Christian, book about manhood. And he referred to the fair hair maiden. We're looking to the fair hair maiden to fill that hole. And
Yeah.
that's what I was doing. This was in the 80s. There was no internet. The only way you can get pornography is if you go buy it. Well, if you're not 18, you can't go buy it, so you got to find it somehow. And so that wasn't big for me. But when I had an opportunity to get physical, I did, because I was hurting. But I have to own it too. That was sin. And I had to, it was years of working through the guilt and the shame, and Satan will throw it up again and again and again, how terrible you are. Well, we got to come to, we got to own it. We got to confess it.
Mhm.
We got to bring it to Christ. We have to receive his grace. But Matthias, that also ties into one of the principles we have been talking about so much in the man identity, that we need a band of brothers. We need other men in our lives. We need older men in our lives who can say, hey, man, I get it. I've been there, but you are a strong man. You can do it. God's got a wife. You worry on becoming the man you need to be. And when that lady comes along, she's going to be looking for the right guy. You will
Yeah.
be the right guy. And you're going to be able to fully embrace. And the Bible even refers to it as becoming one flesh.
Yeah.
And that's one reason why sexual sin is so different. Paul talks about it in Corinthians, because you're becoming one flesh when it's outside of marriage. You're becoming one flesh, which brings all the emotions with it to someone who is not your wife. And
Yeah.
that's going to bring a load of baggage along with it.
Mhm. Yeah, exactly. And it does. It's like I've experienced that. I wish my the biggest regret my wife and I have. Obviously, there's a little bit of difference in it because I have a stepdaughter, but the biggest regret is having multiple encounters of intimacy before marriage. It does affect you. It doesn't. I still look back and I'm like, I claim to be a Christian. Whenever I was living like this, and I look back at
Yeah.
the women I was involved with, and you know and I've seen a lot of them not be really involved with the faith anymore. And I can't help, the enemy really gets to me. And he's like, you know, you probably did that. You probably, as a Christian, set a horrible example for
Mm.
Christ, and you were the one who turned them away. You know, it's like I have to, in those moments, I pray and ask God. I ask Him a lot for forgiveness. I'm like, Lord, if I had anything to do with this, please forgive me. I was a horrible representative of you. I own it and I claim it, and I need grace and forgiveness for that. So like you talk in that book is, you think about it and the enemy likes to throw it in your face. Look at what you've
Yeah.
done.
Yeah.
You know. Anyways, all that being said is all this sexual sin, whether it's pride related or whether it's even, heterosexual related, it all comes from heart issues. It all comes
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
either it just comes from brokenness because there it really is something to biblical marriage and biblical sex that it's more than just a physical act. Like we know this,
Yeah.
and I think we're in the same vein of that's the prescription though. Is I found a lot of healing in my marriage with my wife in that regard, and I don't, we're not going to get too much into that, but that is the prescription. It's there's
Mhm.
nothing more
Mhm.
beautiful than a trusting, intimate relationship
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
your wife.
And Matthias, maybe we can begin to approach the runway with that statement. That was really my goal.
Yeah.
And I'll admit, I had some angst. There's some frustration of, man, I'm just sick and tired of this being thrown in my face.
Mhm.
But it wasn't so much, hey, I'm going to, get the fist up and go box you in the nose. It was, hey, I want you to see that God's design is so good.
Yeah.
Again, you go back to the original picture. The man and the woman were his wife were both naked and they felt no shame. What did Jesus say about this? Because a lot of times I'll hear people say, well, Jesus never talked about homosexuality. Well, technically, you're right. He never used that word.
Mhm.
Well, a couple reasons why. In his audience, nobody debated. In the Hebrew audience in Israel, nobody debated gay marriage. They didn't debate it. But also, even though he didn't use that exact word, that doesn't mean he didn't have a position on it. I mean, it's kind of like this. Jesus never used the word embezzlement, but we know what he had to say about stealing when he talked about give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar and to God what belongs to God. But the context, and this also comes back to what you were saying, Matthias, about the heart. Context in Mark chapter 10, religious leaders are trying to trap Jesus and they're debating divorce. They're debating divorce. There's a strict camp, there's a liberal camp. Okay. We might say there's the Republican camp, there was the Democratic camp of you can't divorce your wife unless it's really, 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 really bad. And then this liberal, oh, you can divorce her for whatever. So they're
Yeah.
trying to bring Jesus in, they're trying to trap him. And the first thing he does, he goes, dudes, number one, you're off. The real issue is you've got hard hearts. That's the only reason you're doing this anyway.
Yeah.
And then number two, what was God's design? Jesus went all the way back to Genesis chapters 1 and 2. In the beginning, God created male and female. And he's talking about marriage. So that eliminates everything else
Yeah.
right there. So Jesus did talk about that. And I want our listeners to know that this thing called marriage and marriage sex is beautiful. There's an entire book in the Bible. You have the Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and then the Song of Solomon. It's really called the Song of Songs.
Mhm.
And the whole point is, I mean, what's the greatest song? Well, it's this one about sex. And some theologians kind of extrapolate that, this is talking about the relationship between God and his people. And yeah, you can kind of do that, a double meaning. But you know what a lot of this is? It's King Solomon.
Yeah.
It's King Solomon talking about the sexual relationship with his wife. And guys, read chapter 7. Um, uh, uh, throughout the Bible, there are various places where sex is spoken of beautifully. I'll just read this one. I'm pretty sure we don't have any preschoolers listening to us. Proverbs 5. Solomon wrote this, verse 18 through 19. May your fountain be blessed, and may you rejoice in the wife of your youth, a loving doe, a graceful deer. May her breast satisfy you always, and may you ever be intoxicated with her love. That wasn't written by Harlequin Romance. That
Right.
wasn't written by Playboy. That was written by, under the direction of the Holy Spirit, by Solomon. That's actually God's design. So what we want to do is and say, guys, there's something beautiful out there
Mhm.
that comes with this, and it's the long term. Um, I, I, we talked about this a few. Well, I think again it was Renee Webb. Two ideas of marriage. I'm going to get my career established. I'm going to get my money, and then try to find someone, and then bring it together. Well, okay, but the other one is, well, I'm going to get married young, and together we're going to build a life together. Now, here's two ways that those two principles are those two options fit into the whole sex and marriage thing. One is children. Guys can, we can father a child up into our 70s. Women cannot.
Yeah.
There's and there are a lot of women who are dealing with that today.
Mhm.
They're not getting married until they're in their 30s or 40s. and then they're trying to have children, and it's more tricky, it's more dangerous. There's a window, but also it's this reality, Matthias, and I joked to you and your bride a couple times in different ways on this. So Debbie and I got married. I was 22, she was 20. This past Tuesday, we celebrated our 35th wedding anniversary. Well, one of the things or blessings of getting married early, having children early, is that the children grow up and they leave, and you still have time with each other
Yeah.
before you get too old.
Yeah,
Um,
you still have time and energy and
yeah,
maybe even a little bit of money.
yeah, and well, actually, here's the deal. Actually, here's the deal. You actually have more money.
Yeah.
You know, when you get married early, especially in college, you don't have any money.
Mhm.
Well, those build fun memories. You know, we didn't have any money, but we had enough change in the car to go get 2 orders of French fries and a Coke to share.
Uh-huh.
And that you have all that, but that builds memories. But also the idea of sex. You know, Hollywood says that, when you're hot and heavy, sex just works. Yeah, it doesn't. It
Yeah.
doesn't. You know, you might have some hot and heavy encounters where it feels good, and but like anything else, sex God created it, but the world's broken, so we have to work on it. So there's this progression of learning to know your spouse to know you, and the whole point is, Matthias, that over time, like any skill, it just gets better and better and better. And the goal is to say, okay, God, I'm going to trust you. I'm going to do it your way. And then I'm going to work on it. Matter of fact, in 1 Corinthians 7, Paul talks about the fact that husbands and wives, your body actually doesn't belong to you, it belongs to your spouse.
Right.
And it's this reality that husbands, guys out there who are married, guys who want to get married, here's what you need to understand. I want you to understand is that sex is not just for you.
Yeah. Acquire some
That when
skills.
you Yeah, and you want to dive into it and realize that there are parts to the female body that 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 are just for sex. You think about the wife's breast. People talk about the animal kingdom. We're just top of the animal kingdom. Well, you look at mammals, female mammals, when they get pregnant, the teats grow, breasts grow. When they have the pups, the litter, or whatever, well, they shrink. That's not the way it is with human females. Why is it? Well, because there's another reason. It's the whole issue of sex. So, the big challenge is to really just celebrate God's design for marriage and for marriage sex.
Yeah. Yeah, I would definitely agree. My wife and I joke a lot that, we weren't God gave us a good sexual life, when we first got married to get us through because we had no good communication skills with each other. No,
Mm,
we didn't have
mm.
we fought so much. And we joke all the time like that's the only thing that got us through to this point. I'm like, if I could encourage men to to have a good sex life, it's with their spouse. I'm like, that will carry you through any hard time. Rely on each other in those times in that way, and you'll work it all out.
Yeah.
You'll be able to work it all out.
It so going back to the blog post that I put out on Monday, at the bottom of the and I wish I had more time to write it, work on it. I felt like it was too long. But at the bottom, I've got a list of 30 challenges plus two. And, it's not, hey, do this, one a day or do all of them, but just, things to think about them. One of them is a book, and I don't know of a better book, simply titled Marriage Sex. And yeah, Married Sex by Gary Thomas and Deborah Fileta. And there's a whole chapter in that book, Matthias, on just the wife,
Mm,
because a lot of times women are told, "Hey, sex is for the husband, and you need to please him. It's your job to please him." And especially Deborah in the book, she talks about the fact, no, it's for you as well. The whole point being, guys, what can you do to please your wife? And then part of the big picture is, again, we got to work on it. So that's a book that I would highly recommend. There are other books on marriage, good books on marriage. One of the original books was called Sheet Music. and I don't have it listed in this, but there's so I'd encourage you to look at the challenges, do some research. A couple of other challenges. One is, we've said this a lot, Matthias, to guys, just ask the girl out.
Yeah.
You know, you're going to have some girls that are going to tell you no. I could tell you stories of, being in high school. Well, in junior high, I asked a girl out and she was like, yeah, no. And then she goes with someone else. And, they're going to tell you no.
Yeah.
But the right girl is going to say yes, and just have the courage to get out there. Josiah talked about that 2 weeks ago in his story. But also, I want to challenge you guys. Um, Not only the pornography issue, but there are a lot of guys and girls who are living together. And guys, I want to say, dude, just ask the girl to marry you.
Yeah.
We're waiting for more money. Don't. You're never going to have enough money.
Yeah.
If you wait to have and you're wasting years. And also, here's the deal: if that girl is not the right girl, if you're wondering, I'm not sure if she's not, I'm not sure. Well, okay, if she's not the right girl, you're never going to find the right girl while
Yeah.
you're wasting time with the wrong girl. So guys, I just want to challenge you, dude. Just ask the girl to marry you and get going.
Yeah.
Ultimately, to celebrate. Hebrews chapter 13, the author, I think it's in verse 4, talks about the fact that we are to honor the marriage bed. We're to honor it. And again, the, the, that's my desire. Everybody's talking about celebrating pride. And we want to say, well, that actually is that leads to a lot of damage.
Yeah. We wanna
We want to,
celebrate yeah, I was gonna say, we wanna celebrate traditional married sex, not
yeah,
just for the sake of pushing back against LGBT stuff
yeah,
that's been,
yeah,
pushed on us, but also because it's good, because it's
yeah,
amazing, and when it's
yeah,
done correctly in the confines of God's biblical design, like you said, there's myths and fallacies that people say, "Oh, well, married sex is boring," or "That's why
yeah.
people cheat," or well, I mean, I'm sure there's cases of that happening, but there's a failure on one or both sides when
Yeah.
that happens or when that occurs. Because if you were both in it to figure out how to enjoy this with each other, you're going to make
And
it work.
serve each other
Yeah,
in
and
it.
serving each
Yeah.
other is the biggest aspect of that. It's going to it's going to be amazing, and it is something worth celebrating. So I think that's kind of where you're going. I might have take over there.
I think you're right. I think those who are disciples of Jesus, those who know Jesus, those who have been forgiven, transformed, who are in marriage, we have the best message out there when it comes to being reconciled with God and knowing God. But when it comes to sex and marriage, we have the best message out there. And if it is the best message, the challenge is to just shout it from the rooftops.
There you go. So June is now traditional married sex month.
There we are.
Trad
There
married
we
sex
are.
month. Well, Steve, I know you kind of gave those challenges. Do you have any like formal way you want to kind of put it together or like a concise way right now? Just kind of list them off real quick.
I think I would just reiterate what we've talked about. Here's what you need to know, guys. Here's what you need to know: that God created sex, created it good, but He created it for marriage. So if you're not married, be the man you need to be today, guys. You got to dump the pornography.
Yeah.
You got to get with a band of brothers who will encourage you in the fight. You've got to become the man that God's called you to be. Guys, if you're not married but you're living with someone, just deal with it. Don't wait. Just ask the girl to marry. If she's the right one, don't wait for the perfect. Come to Houston, Texas, get a marriage license here, and I'll marry you for free. Just deal with it. Don't wait for this Cinderella wedding. The memories 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 45 years down the road will be worth doing it right now. For the guys who are married, if you need to go get some counseling, go do it. Deal with the dysfunctions that, the ghost that are in your head or in your wife's head. Deal with the ghost, get some counseling, do some research on your own, and just be one in your local community, your local church that says, hey, I am so proud to be married to my spouse, so proud to be married to my bride. And I would say, guys, keep using the word bride. There's just
Yeah.
something magical about that word, instead of wife, and spouse. And I want to celebrate her. I want to celebrate as celebrate what God's design is, and enjoy it. But also, it's this hope that the world around us who is starting to see the problems. Actually, I didn't read the whole study. I saw this on AOL, and AOL News is actually somewhat liberal, but they even acknowledge that there's a growing number of people in our culture who are opposed to gay marriage. So there is a reality of, well, hey, this isn't as good as I thought. um, so what next? Well, if we can live our lives celebrating what God has done, more people will say, "Hey, I think I want to look into this Jesus. I
Yeah.
think I want to look into who Jesus is, what Jesus did, and how my life can be transformed, and how my marriage and sex life can be transformed."
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, those are all good things, good points, and yeah, it's such a good thing, and I think after being married now 7 years, I know you've been married some 35, five
35.
times what I've been married, and you're still saying the same things I'm echoing. So I'm like, okay, great. It keeps getting even better.
It gets even
It
better.
gets
It
even
gets
better.
even better.
Awesome. I couldn't imagine, but that's awesome. Um, yeah, so good conversation today, Steve. We want to reclaim Pride Month as trad married sex month. Um, you know, not just because we want to push back against what
Yeah.
we know is wrong, but because we want to celebrate what we know is right. So, thank you everybody for tuning in to another episode of The Man Identity. Hopefully, you got something out of this conversation today. And if you did, make sure to share, like, subscribe, follow, all of everything you can do to
Yeah.
support this channel. Comment. Yeah, it helps with the algorithm and pushes this out to more people. So thank you again for tuning in. We'll see you again next week. Stay strong.